Welcome on board, chosen one. Sit down. Breathe out the weight you carried into this room, because you will not need it anymore. Feel the shift already moving through your chest, that low, quiet pressure that tells you something is changing without your permission. My name is Marcus, and I have spent decades watching people break and watching people rise, and I learned to tell the difference long before the world could. I have seen the ones everybody wrote off. I have watched them sit in silence while louder people took the credit, took the room, took the applause. And I have watched again and again what happens years later when the loud ones grow quiet and the quiet ones become impossible to ignore. Imagine this, a blade resting in the dark belly of a forge, not yet finished, not yet sharp, buried in coals that glow the color of a wound. Everyone who walked past that forge saw only a dull grey thing, and they called it a rusted piece of scrap, something to be thrown out with the rest of the junk. They laughed at it. They said it would never cut anything, that it would never even hold an edge. And the blade said nothing, because the blade knew something they did not. Fire was not destroying it. Fire was making it. Hold that image, chosen one. Keep that dull grey blade in the corner of your mind, the one they mistook for a lump of scrap. Because we are not done with it, not by a long way. Funny how it works. The ones who are loudest about your limits are the quietest now. They had so much to say when they thought you were finished. So many opinions when they believed you could not hear the difference between advice and contempt. And now, look who has run out of words. Look who checks what you are doing when they think no one notices. That silence around you is new, and it unsettles them more than it unsettles you. I remember the first time I truly understood this pattern. Years ago, I sat across from a man everyone in his own family had labelled the disappointment, the soft one, the one who would never amount to much. He barely spoke, and I watched, over the years that followed, every single one of those people slowly lower their eyes when he walked into a room. Nobody announced it. Nobody apologized. The room simply reorganized itself around the person they had underestimated. I saw it with my own eyes. And it taught me the thing I am about to spend this entire journey proving to you. When they said you were too quiet, they meant they could not read you, and that terrified them. When they said you were too sensitive, they meant you noticed things they hoped no one would notice. When they said you were not ambitious enough, they meant you would not play their game by their rules, and a player they cannot control is a player they cannot beat. When they said you were lucky, later when things turned, they meant they could not admit out loud that it was never luck at all. Decode their language, chosen one. Underneath every insult they handed you was a confession they never intended to make. Here is the part that matters, and I will not dress it up with anything clever, because this deserves the truth. You were underestimated, and it hurt. It is not weakness to admit that. Being overlooked when you gave everything hurt. Being talked over when you knew the answer hurt. Watching lesser people get the reward you earned and being told to be grateful for the scraps, that hurt. The betrayal of people you trusted, the ones who smiled to your face and measured you behind your back, that left a mark. The loneliness of being surrounded by people and still unseen. The humiliation of being doubted in front of others. I am not going to pretend those wounds were small. They were real, and you are going to understand before this is over that not one of them was wasted. Before we go deeper, touch the like button. Not for me, that is simply how the universe marks that you were here, that you showed up on the night something turned. Now stay with me, because the story has barely started. There is a question sitting under everything I just said, and you already feel it. What actually happened in the moment the universe quietly moved you from the pile of the forgotten into the ranks of the untouchable? Because there was a moment. There always is. You did not notice it when it happened. Nobody does. But it happened, and its aftermath is what you are living inside of right now. I am going to show you exactly where that shift began, but not yet. First, you need to understand something else, or the answer will slip through your fingers. That silence you feel around you now, understand what it actually is. It is not peace. It is not them finally leaving you alone out of respect. It is their fear, wearing the mask of quiet. People who are confident do not go silent. They keep talking. They keep prodding. The moment someone who used to be loud about you goes still, that is not indifference. That is a person recalculating. That is someone who looked at you recently and saw something that did not fit their old picture, and it frightened them enough to stop the noise. Their silence is a signal, chosen one. It means they finally understand that the thing they dismissed is now the thing they cannot predict. This is the place where most people turn back. Because comfort is easier than truth, and the truth I am about to walk you through demands that you stop seeing yourself as the victim of your story and start seeing yourself as its author. That is heavier than it sounds. Most people cannot carry it. They would rather stay wrapped in the familiar ache of being wronged than accept the far more dangerous idea that they were being forged the entire time. But you are still here. You did not click away when it got quiet. And that is not an accident. You were never here by accident. So here is what I want you to do, and it will feel strange, and I want you to do it anyway. Leave the number 777 in the comments. Not for luck, not because it is some trend. It is a signal. It is the mark that says you were among the ones who stayed past the point where the comfortable left. And if you truly are one of the chosen, you already feel it right now. That pressure behind the ribs, that quiet recognition. Hold on to that feeling. We are going to name exactly what it is before we are done. Number 1. They underestimated you on purpose, and their blindness was the greatest gift they ever gave you. Here is the truth they will never admit. People do not overlook you by accident when you have something in you. They overlook you because seeing you clearly would force them to change how they treat you, and most people would rather stay comfortable than be fair. So they built a small box, wrote your name on it, and decided that was all you were, and they never looked inside again. Imagine this: a chessboard late in a long game. One player leaning back, relaxed, certain the match is already won, barely glancing at a single quiet piece drifting along the edge of the board. That piece looks like nothing, a pawn, ignored. And with every move that goes unwatched, that quiet piece slides closer to the far end, closer to the moment it stops being a pawn and becomes the most dangerous thing on the board. The confident player never sees it coming, not because the piece hid, but because arrogance made him blind. You were that piece. Their certainty that you did not matter was the exact thing that let you move unwatched. You might ask yourself, was I really being underestimated, or was I just not good enough yet? No. Stop that thought where it stands. Being underestimated does not mean you were lacking. It means they measured you with a broken ruler and blamed the measurement on you. The problem was never your size. The problem was their eyes. And here is the part that turns it, the part that should straighten your spine. Every second they spent not watching you was a second you got to grow without interference. No sabotage, no jealousy aimed at you, because you were beneath their attention. You developed in the shadows while they wasted their energy on the people they considered threats. They handed you the one thing every rising person needs and almost never gets: privacy to become dangerous. I watched this happen to me once in my own life, in a smaller way than yours perhaps, but no less real. People decided early who I was and stopped paying attention. And in that gap of their attention, I learned things they never learned, watched things they were too busy to watch. By the time they looked back, I was not the person they had filed away years before. I had outgrown the box, and there was nothing they could do about it because they had not been watching the walls stretch. That is the gift of being underestimated. It is a cloak. Wear it. The weakness they saw was never weakness. It was potential they were too shallow to recognize. And that recognition, or the lack of it, was their mistake, not yours. Their blindness. Their loss. Good, because now the piece has reached the edge of the board, and what it becomes next is entirely outside their control. And that is exactly where we go next. Number 2. Your softness was never weakness. It was a blade so well made it did not need to announce itself. And number 3 walks right beside it, so we take them together, because they were always the same lesson wearing two faces. They told you that you were too soft, too gentle, too willing to feel. They said it like a verdict, like a flaw stamped on your file. Here is the truth they will never admit. The softest-looking people are often the ones with the deepest strength, because it takes far more force to stay kind in a world that keeps testing you than it takes to go cold and call it power. Imagine this. Deep water, an ocean current, moving without noise, without spectacle. On the surface it looks calm, gentle even. And beneath that gentle surface moves a force that reshapes coastlines, that no wall on earth can stop, that simply goes around, through, and past everything in its path. It does not need to look violent to be unstoppable. That was always you. They saw the calm surface and thought it meant there was nothing underneath. They mistook your gentleness for emptiness. They confused your patience with passivity. And that mistake is one they will keep making right up until the moment the current has already moved them somewhere they never chose to go. You might ask yourself, but doesn't my softness get taken advantage of? Doesn't it make me a target? No. Here is the reversal, and it is the heart of it. Your softness was never the vulnerability. Your softness was the discipline. Anyone can turn cruel when the world hurts them. That is the easy road. That is the coward's shortcut. And the people who called you weak took that shortcut a long time ago and dressed it up as strength. But you held on to your ability to feel, to care, to stay human under pressure. And that took a strength they never developed, because they never had to. They fold under the weight you carry every single day without complaint. And your patience, that is number 3, the twin of your softness, and just as misread. They mistook your patience for waiting, for hesitation, for a lack of hunger. Funny how patience looks like weakness right up until the moment it detonates into inevitability. You were not waiting because you were afraid. You were waiting because you understood something they never grasped. Timing is a weapon. The person who can wait, who can hold still while others burn their energy on noise and hurry, is the person who arrives at the exact moment when everyone else is exhausted. They spent their patience like it was infinite. You saved yours like it was gold. Guess which of you has anything left now? I have watched loud, impatient people burn themselves down to ash chasing quick wins, all while dismissing the patient one in the corner as someone who lacked drive. And I have watched that patient one, years later, simply still be standing, still building, still moving forward with quiet certainty, long after the loud ones ran out of fuel. Patience is not the absence of hunger, it is hunger that learned to aim. Your softness and your patience were never two weaknesses. They were two edges of the same well-forged blade, and they have been sharpening this whole time, sharpening in the dark, sharpening in the silence. And the ones who laughed are about to learn what that current was really doing beneath the calm. And this is still not the deepest part. There is a reason the loudest one among them loses sleep, and it is not the reason you would guess. But before I hand you that, you need to understand what the quiet years did to you, because the answer lives inside your loneliness, inside your silence, and that is exactly where we are heading next. Number 4. Your loneliness was never punishment. It was the sound of a workshop where no one was allowed to interrupt the work. They looked at how alone you were, and they made it mean something ugly. They whispered that you must be difficult, that there must be a reason no one stayed close, that isolation was proof of some defect in you. Here is the truth they will never admit. The people they surround themselves with are not friends. They are noise. They are a crowd assembled to keep them from ever having to sit alone with who they really are. And you, chosen one, you sat alone with yourself for years, and you survived it, and that is a thing most of them could not do for a single week. Imagine this, a single seed buried deep in dark soil, no light, no sound, no company. To anyone watching the surface, nothing is happening. The ground looks empty, dead even. And beneath it, in that total darkness and total solitude, roots are spreading, gripping, drinking, building a foundation strong enough to hold a thing that will one day break the surface and keep rising long after everyone stopped watching the empty ground. The solitude was not the absence of growth. The solitude was the condition growth required. You were not abandoned in the dark, chosen one. You were planted. You might ask yourself, but wasn't all that time alone just wasted time? Time I lost while others built connections and moved ahead? No. Turn that around and look at it properly. While they were spending their energy managing a crowd, performing for people who would forget them the moment they stopped being useful, you were doing the one thing that actually builds a person. You were becoming self-sufficient. You learned to enjoy your own company, to trust your own mind, to make decisions without a committee of frightened people voting on your worth. That is not a loss. That is the rarest kind of independence, and almost no one develops it, because almost no one is forced to. I have known people who could not sit alone in a quiet room for 10 minutes without reaching for a distraction, without needing someone to reflect them back to themselves. They mistook their constant company for strength. It was the opposite. They had built an entire life around never facing themselves. And I have watched people who spent long stretches truly alone walk into that same quiet room and find it comfortable, because they had already made peace with the one person they could never escape. You did the harder thing. You did it without applause. And it built something in you that cannot be taken, cannot be borrowed, and cannot be faked. That loneliness sharpened you in a way company never could. It taught you to hear your own voice above the crowd, and a person who can hear their own voice is a person no one can lead astray. They can no longer talk you into doubting yourself, because you spent too long alone learning what your own certainty sounds like. The isolation they pitied was the exact process that made you impossible to manipulate. And that leads straight into the next thing they got wrong about you, because it walks hand in hand with your solitude. Number 5. Your silence was never emptiness. It was a room they were not allowed to enter, and it drove them out of their minds. They filled every gap with talk. They mistook noise for presence, volume for importance, and they judged your quiet as if it were a lack of something. Here is the truth they will never admit. They talk so much because silence frightens them. Silence forces a person to sit with what is real, and most of them cannot afford to look at what is real, so they drown it out. Your comfort with silence was never a deficiency. It was proof you had nothing you were desperate to hide. Imagine this: the still surface of a deep lake at night, unmoving, giving nothing away, reflecting the sky back at anyone who looks. You cannot tell from the surface how deep it goes. You cannot see what moves beneath. And that not knowing is precisely what unsettles people. A shallow puddle shows its whole bottom in an instant. A deep lake keeps its depth to itself. When you stayed silent, they could not read you, could not measure you, could not find the edges of you, and people are frightened of what they cannot measure. Your silence made you the one thing they could not solve. You might ask yourself, but doesn't staying silent mean I let people walk over me, that I fail to stand up for myself? No. There is a difference between the silence of a person who has nothing to say and the silence of a person who has decided that not everything deserves a response. You were not silent because you were weak. You were silent because you understood that most arguments are traps, that most reactions are exactly what the other person is fishing for, and that the fastest way to lose power is to hand it over the moment someone provokes you. Your silence was control. It was the refusal to be baited. It was strength that did not need to prove itself out loud. Nothing scares a manipulator more than a person who will not react. They rely on your reaction. It is their oxygen. When they poke and you stay calm, when they provoke and you simply watch, they lose their grip, because their entire method depends on getting a rise out of you. Your stillness starved them, and they hated that. They called it cold. They called it strange. They called it anything except what it was, which was a discipline they could never match. I have watched a single unbothered silence unravel people who thought they were in control. It is a quiet kind of devastating, and you carried that quiet like it was nothing, never knowing it was one of the sharpest tools you owned. And here is where it deepens, because I promised you the real reason the loudest one among them cannot sleep, and I will keep that promise, but not this second. First, you need to see what happened to every wound they gave you, because those wounds are not scars of defeat. They are the markings on a blade, and once you see them for what they are, you will never see your past the same way again. That is exactly where we go now. Number 6. Their mockery was never proof of your failure. It was the sound of people flinching at something they secretly recognized. When they laughed at you, when they made you the joke, when they traded little remarks at your expense, it felt like judgment, and it landed like judgment. Here is the truth they will never admit. People do not waste energy mocking what genuinely does not matter to them. You do not laugh at the empty chair. You laugh nervously at the thing that makes you uneasy, the thing you cannot quite place, the thing that threatens the story you told yourself about who is above whom. Their mockery was not a measure of your smallness. It was a measure of their discomfort. Imagine this: a pack of animals circling something they do not understand, snapping and making noise, not because the thing is weak, but because it is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar reads to a frightened mind as danger. The noise is not confidence. The noise is nerves. Anyone who has watched real predators knows the truly dangerous one is silent. It is the noisy ones that are unsure. When they surrounded you with laughter, they were the nervous pack, and you were the thing they could not categorize. Their volume was not power over you. It was fear they had not learned to name. You might ask yourself, but if they were mocking me, doesn't that mean I did something embarrassing, something that deserved it? No. Reverse it and hold it in the light. The instinct to mock someone comes from a need to push that person below you, and you only need to push down what you are afraid might rise above you. Their laughter was a preemptive strike. It was them trying to shrink you before you could grow past them, because on some level they already sensed the trajectory. You did not earn their mockery by being lesser. You earned it by being a threat they had not yet been able to admit out loud. And number 7 walks right beside it, because every one of those moments left a mark, and those marks are the whole point. Your scars were never evidence of how much you lost. They were the record of everything you survived. Here is the reversal that changes the entire story. A blade with no marks on it has never been tested, has never been used, has never proven it can hold an edge under pressure. The scars on you, the wounds they gave you, the humiliations you carried home in silence, those are not signs of weakness. Those are the strike lines on a weapon that went through the fire and came out holding its shape. Imagine this. A blade pulled from the forge, and along its length you can see the marks of the hammer, the lines where the metal was struck again and again, folded, tested, and pressed back into form. A person who does not understand blades sees flaws. A person who does understand sees exactly why this blade will not break. Every strike that could have shattered it instead made it denser, harder, more certain of its own shape. You are covered in those lines, chosen one, and you spent years believing they meant you were damaged. They meant the opposite. They meant you were tempered. I carry my own marks. I will not pretend I walked through decades of watching people at their worst and came out untouched. There were moments that cut deep, betrayals I did not see coming, doubts that whispered at 3 in the morning that maybe the loud ones were right. But every one of those cuts taught me something no comfortable person ever learns. Pain is a teacher that does not repeat itself. It says a thing once, hard, and the ones who survive it never forget the lesson. Your scars are not your shame. They are your curriculum, and you have graduated from a school most people never even enter. They wanted those wounds to make you smaller, to teach you to stay in the box, to keep your head down and your hopes low. Instead, the wounds did what fire does to good steel. They made you harder to break, harder to fool, harder to frighten. Every strike that was meant to end you added a line to the blade and left you more finished than before. And now the blade is nearly complete. Now the marks tell a story the noisy pack cannot bear to read. Because the next thing you are about to understand is the reason their loudest one lies awake in the dark, and it is not what they would ever confess. That is exactly where we go next. Number 8. The loudest one among them lies awake at night, and the reason is not your success. It is far more personal than that. I told you I would give you the real cause of their sleeplessness, and here it is, the thing they will choke on before they ever say it out loud. Here is the truth they will never admit. The one who mocked you most, the one who was loudest about your limits, the one who worked hardest to keep you small, did all of that because somewhere deep in themselves they saw in you the exact thing they gave up on in themselves. You were a mirror, and they could not stand what it reflected. Imagine this: a hall of mirrors, and someone walking through it who has spent their whole life avoiding their own reflection. Everywhere they turn, there they are, the version of themselves that took the easy road, that folded early, that traded who they could have been for who it was safer to be. That is what you are to them. Every time you refuse to break, Every time you rise a little further, you become a mirror showing them the courage they abandoned. That is why they cannot look at you directly anymore. That is why they go quiet when you enter. You are not just a rival to them. You are the evidence of their own surrender. And sit with that for a second, chosen one, because it changes how you carry yourself in a room. You might ask yourself, if I really unsettled them that much, why did they seem so confident, so untouchable, while I felt like the small one? No, that confidence was the mask, and the mask was always thickest over the deepest crack. The people most desperate to appear untouchable are the ones most terrified of being seen. Their volume was never strength, it was insulation. It was a wall built loud and high, specifically because something behind it could not bear the light. And you, without lifting a finger, simply by continuing to exist and refusing to shrink, kept pressing on that wall. That is why they cannot rest. The mirror does not stop reflecting just because they close their eyes. I have sat with people at the end of long roads, people who spent their lives being the loud ones, the dismissive ones, and I have heard what leaks out when the performance finally exhausts them. It is never pride. It is regret. It is the quiet confession that they saw someone they wrote off go on to become exactly what they themselves were too afraid to attempt. That is the thing that keeps a person awake. Not another person's win, their own unlived life held up in the shape of someone they underestimated. You did that to them, chosen one. Not with revenge, just by refusing to disappear. So understand what your mere existence does to them now. You do not have to lift a hand. You do not have to say a word. Your continued rising is the sentence, and they are the ones who have to live inside it every single night. That is a kind of justice no argument could ever deliver. And it was never yours to force. The universe handles this part. You only had to keep going. And that is exactly what makes what comes next so dangerous for them, because the cracks in the mask are about to become impossible to hide. Number 9. Their masks are cracking, and number 10 stands right behind it, because the panic and the unraveling are one continuous thing, so we take them together. The mask is the face they show the world, the composed, in control, above-it-all face they wear to convince everyone, including themselves, that they were always the ones who mattered. Here is the truth they will never admit. A mask only works while no one is testing it. And your rising is the test. Every step you take that they said you could not take puts another hairline fracture across the surface, and they can feel it spreading even when no one else can see it yet. Imagine this: a frozen river in the first days of a thaw, still looking solid on top, still holding the shape of winter, and underneath the water is already moving, already pressing, already carrying the whole thing toward the moment it gives way. To a careless eye, the ice looks the same as it did in the dead of the cold, but the sound has changed. There is a low groaning in it, a tension. That is where they are now. The surface still holds the old shape, the old confidence, but underneath, everything they built their certainty on is already in motion, and part of them hears the groaning. You might ask yourself, but I don't see them panicking. They still act the same, so how do I know any of this is real? No. You are looking for the wrong evidence. Panic in these people is not loud. It is not dramatic. It shows up in the small things, the extra glance, the forced casualness when your name comes up, the way they suddenly need to remind everyone of their own worth, unprompted, as if answering an accusation no one made. That overcompensation is the panic. People who are genuinely secure do not need to keep reproving it. The louder they insist nothing has changed, the more certain you can be that everything has. And this is number 10, the twin of that cracking, the part where they finally see it. They are realizing you have outgrown the game entirely. Not that you are winning their game. That would still leave them in the comfortable position of being your reference point. No. The real terror is discovering that you stopped playing by their rules, that you climbed out of the arena they built, that the measurements they used to keep you small no longer reach you. You outgrew their whole game, and a person who has outgrown the game cannot be controlled by the rewards and punishments that game runs on. Imagine this: a cage, and the thing inside it slowly realizing the cage was never locked, that it only stayed inside because it was told the bars were real. And then it steps out, not by breaking anything, just by walking through a door that was always open. The keepers built their entire power on the belief that the creature could not leave. The moment it steps free, their whole authority collapses, because it was never in the bars. It was in the belief. When you outgrew their game, you walked through that door, and every threat they still hold in their hands turned to nothing, because those threats only worked inside the cage. I have watched people spend years trying to win approval from a game that was rigged against them from the start, exhausting themselves for a prize that was never going to be handed over. And I have watched the rare ones simply stop. Stop competing on rigged ground. Stop asking permission from people who were never going to grant it. And the instant they stopped, the power those people held over them evaporated, because that power was borrowed and the loan had just been recalled. You are one of the ones who stopped, and they feel that the leverage is gone. The mask is cracking and the game is over, and they know it even if they cannot say it. And now we come to the part I have been holding back, the one truth that changes everything, though a moment ago you might not have been ready for it. Because up to now I have been showing you what they got wrong and what it did to them. Now I am going to show you something about you that they never suspected and that you may have only half believed about yourself. It lives in the next number, and once you hear it, you will understand why the outcome was decided long before any of them thought the contest had even begun. That is exactly where we go now. Number 11. You already won, and the strangest part is that it was settled before they ever thought the game had started. This is the reversal that reorganizes your entire past. Here is the truth they will never admit. They thought the contest was happening on their timeline, on their terms, in the visible world of applause and titles and public scoreboards. And while they were busy watching that surface, the real outcome was being decided somewhere they never thought to look. Inside you. In the years of quiet forging, they dismissed as you falling behind. The result was locked in before the loud part even began. Imagine this. Two travelers set out for the same distant summit. One takes the loud, crowded path, stopping every few steps to be seen and praised, boots barely scuffed, burning his breath on the performance of climbing. The other slips onto the quiet route, the steep one, and just keeps moving, lungs raw, hands scraped on cold rock, through the switchbacks where no one is watching. By the time the loud climber looks up, the quiet one is already at the summit, wind in the face, has been there a while, resting, looking down. The race was never close. It only looked close because one of them was performing and the other was actually climbing. You were the one climbing. You might ask yourself, if I already won, why doesn't it feel like winning? Why does so much of it still feel like a struggle? No. What you are feeling is not the absence of victory. It is the delay between the victory and the world catching up to it. There is always a gap. The moment a thing becomes true and the moment everyone else recognizes it are not the same moment, and that gap can feel like doubt if you do not understand what it is. But make no mistake, the decisive shift already happened. The forging is done. What you are living through now is not the fight, it is the aftermath. And the aftermath only feels uncertain because the announcement has not been made out loud yet. I have learned to spot a decided outcome long before the visible signs arrive, because I have watched the pattern too many times to miss it. There is a certain steadiness that settles into a person once the real work is finished, a quiet that is not doubt but readiness. The world keeps treating them as if the question is still open, and they let it, because they know something the world does not. The verdict is already in. You have that steadiness now, chosen one, whether or not you have named it. That low certainty behind your ribs is not some fragile hope you are clinging to. It is the settled memory of a thing that already happened. They will keep acting as if it is still up for grabs, still theirs to take, right up until the moment reality forces them to see what was true all along. And when that moment comes, it will not feel like a sudden turn to you. It will feel like the world finally admitting what you already knew in the quiet. You did not just win, you won early, and you won in a place they never thought to guard. Good, because the next thing you need to understand is the exact moment the universe made it official, the point past which nothing they do can reverse it. That is exactly where we go next. Number 12. Test it yourself right now, chosen one. The things they used to say that could stop you cold, do they still freeze you the way they once did? Somewhere along the way, their old tactics stopped landing on you. And here is the truth they will never admit. That is not you getting tougher by accident. That is the mark of a line you already crossed, a single moment when the universe quietly moved you from the column of the overlooked into the column of the untouchable. I promised at the very beginning I would show you where that line lives. Here it is. It came in the ordinary quiet of a day that felt like any other. In the instant you decided, maybe without even fully noticing, that you would keep going whether or not anyone ever saw you do it. That was the crossing. And once you crossed it, their levers went dead in their hands. Imagine this. A ship slipping past the last headland out of a harbour, out to where the open water takes over and the whole direction of the voyage is finally set. On the deck it feels like nothing changed at all. Same salt in the air, same grey light on the swell. But a threshold was crossed that cannot be uncrossed. The harbour no longer has any claim on the ship. That is what happened to you the day your resolve stopped needing an audience. You never felt the headland slide by, but it slid by all the same, and everything the harbour used to control simply lost its grip on you. You might ask yourself, if such a moment really happened, why can't I point to it? Why don't I remember the day everything changed? No, that is exactly how you know it was real. The genuine turning points almost never announce themselves while they are happening. They feel like ordinary Tuesdays, like any forgettable afternoon. It is only much later, looking back, that you can trace the line and see, there. That was the moment the whole trajectory shifted. You cannot name the day because you are living inside it, not watching it from above. But the line is there. You have already crossed it. And the proof again is that their old weapons no longer draw blood. Think about it honestly one more time. The disapproval that once could stop you dead in your tracks, does it still carry that weight? The remarks that used to keep you up at night, do they even reach you now? Or do they slide off before they land? Somewhere along the way it stopped working, and you may not have marked the day, but you felt the difference in your body. That is the point of no return made visible. Not in some dramatic event, but in the quiet fact that their leverage decayed while you were not even looking for it. The universe does its bookkeeping silently. It moved your name from one column to the other without a ceremony, but it moved it, and there is no moving it back. I have watched this crossing happen in people who never realized it happened until years later, when they finally understood that some ordinary decision, some quiet refusal to quit on a night no one remembers, was the hinge the whole rest of their life turned on. That is the nature of these things. The universe does not send a notice. It simply reassigns you and lets you discover it in the aftermath. You have been reassigned, chosen one. You are past the headland. And a person past the headland becomes something their old world was never built to handle, which is exactly the thing we come to next. Number 13. You have become an anomaly, a variable their system was never designed to control, and this is where their real helplessness begins. Every system, every group of people who like their world orderly and predictable, runs on the ability to sort everyone into known categories with known responses. Push here, get that reaction. Withhold this, get that compliance. Here is the truth they will never admit. You stopped responding to the inputs. The buttons they used to press produce nothing now. And a person who does not respond to the levers is a person the whole machine cannot process. You did not beat their system. You became something it cannot compute. Imagine this: a machine built to sort objects into neat bins, running smoothly, confidently, until an object comes down the line that fits none of its categories, triggers none of its sensors, matches none of its patterns. The machine does not know what to do. It cannot bin what it cannot classify. It stalls, whirs, tries the old routines and finds them useless. That is you now, inside their system. Not a broken part. A part so far outside their design that the design has no response for it. And there is a strange, total freedom in being the thing the machine cannot sort, because the machine's power over you was always its ability to categorize you first. You might ask yourself, but doesn't being an anomaly just make me an outsider, someone who doesn't belong anywhere? No. Reverse that 8, because it is hiding a crown. Not belonging to their system was never exile. It was independence. The people neatly sorted into the machine's bins are the people the machine controls completely. They belong, yes, and that belonging quietly costs them every ounce of their autonomy. You do not belong to it, which means it does not own you. The outsider they pitied is the one person in the whole arrangement who cannot be managed, cannot be predicted, cannot be pulled into line by the usual threats. Your not belonging is the exact source of your untouchability. And here is why they cannot simply erase you, cannot remove the anomaly and restore their tidy order. They tried already. Think back. The mockery, the exclusion, the underestimation, all of it was the system attempting to eliminate the variable it could not classify. And it failed. You are still here. You not only survived the attempt to delete you, you grew stronger inside it, which means the system now faces something worse than an anomaly. It faces an anomaly that has proven it cannot be removed. That is the moment a system stops trying to control something and starts, quietly, to fear it. Because a variable you cannot classify and cannot delete is a variable that will eventually rewrite the rules. I have watched systems of people bend around a single person they could neither absorb nor expel, watched the unspoken order of a room reshape itself to accommodate the one it could not command. It is a remarkable thing to witness. The group tells itself nothing has changed, keeps up the old language, the old hierarchy, and all the while it is rearranging itself around the immovable fact of a person it cannot control. You are that immovable fact now. Not by force, by having survived every attempt to make you fit. And that survival is what turns the final verdict, the one that has been waiting since the first section, into something undeniable. Because there is one last thing to close, one final truth that ties the whole blade together, and it circles all the way back to where we began. I have shown you the mask cracking, the game outgrown, the victory already won, the point of no return crossed, the anomaly they cannot delete. But there is a single sentence that gathers all of it into one, that answers the question hiding underneath this entire journey. Were you lucky, or were you always going to arrive here? The answer is in the final number, and it changes the meaning of everything that came before. That is exactly where we go now. Number 14. You were never lucky. You were inevitable. This is the last strike of the hammer, the one that finishes the blade, and it circles back to the forge I set glowing in front of you at the very beginning. Remember that dull grey blade buried in the coals, the one everyone walked past and called a rusted piece of scrap? Here is the truth they will never admit. When it finally came out of the fire, sharp and finished and impossible to ignore, they wanted to call it luck, a fluke, a surprise, because calling it luck let them off the hook. Luck is random. Luck could have happened to anyone. If you were merely lucky, then their failure to see you was forgivable. But you were not lucky. You were being made the entire time, in plain sight, while they refused to watch. Imagine this. The blade lifted from the forge at last, catching the light, its edge true, its marks telling the whole story of every strike it survived. And the ones who called it scrap now stare at it and reach for the only word that protects them. Lucky. As if the fire fell by accident, as if the hammer swung itself, as if years of pressure and heat and folding could hammer out a finished blade by pure coincidence. It could not. Nothing about a forged blade is luck. Every part of it is process, intention, endurance. And you, chosen one, are not the accident they need you to be. You are the finished result of everything they thought was destroying you. You might ask yourself, but hasn't luck played some part? Weren't there moments that could have gone differently? No. Hear this clearly, because it is the hinge of the whole verdict. What looks like luck from the outside is almost always the meeting point of preparation and time. The forged blade seems lucky only to someone who did not watch the forging. You watched it. You lived every hour of it. The lonely years, the silent rooms, the scars, the patience, the softness held under pressure. That was the forging. And a blade that survives that process does not arrive at its edge by chance. It arrives because it could not have arrived any other way. You were not a coin toss that happened to land right. You were a certainty that took time to become visible. And here is the ring that closes it, the callback that seals the whole thing shut. At the start I told you the blade knew something the passers-by did not, that the fire was not destroying it, but making it. You are the proof of that now. Everything they did to break you was the fire doing its work. Their underestimation gave you privacy to grow. Their mockery hardened you into someone doubt could not reach. Their silence taught you to hear your own voice above the noise. Every single thing meant to end you was, all along, a strike of the hammer finishing the blade. They were not your obstacles. Without ever meaning to, they were your forge. So when they finally reach for that word, lucky, understand it for the surrender it is. It is the last defense of people who cannot face the truth that they watched a finished weapon being made and did nothing because they refused to see it. You were inevitable. You were always going to arrive here, not because the universe handed you an easy road, but because you walked the hard one all the way to its end. The blade is complete now. It is out of the fire, and there is not a single one of them who can call it anything but what it is. That, chosen one, is the last mistake they made, and the sentence they now have to live inside. Number 15. Now we arrive at the end of the forge, and this last part is not about them at all. It is about what you do now that the blade is finished. Because a blade that has come through the fire, that has been struck and folded and sharpened until it holds a true edge, exists for one reason: to be used. Not to hang on a wall as a monument to what it survived. Not to sit in a case where people can admire the scars without ever seeing the edge do its work. Here is the truth they will never admit, and it is the truth that matters most to you now. Everything you went through means nothing if you set it down and go back to living small. The forging was never the point. The forging was the preparation. What you build with a finished blade is the point. Imagine this: a sword, perfectly made, resting in its sheath, and a hand reaching for it, and the quiet understanding that a weapon's whole purpose lives in the moment it is finally drawn and put to work. All the fire, all the hammering, all the patience of the forge led to this. Not to the blade sitting untouched, but to the blade in motion, doing the thing it was made to do. You are that finished blade. And the question that now stands in front of you is not whether you are ready. You are ready. You have been ready since you crossed the point of no return. The only question left is whether you will draw yourself and begin. You might ask yourself, but how do I move forward when so much of the pain is still fresh, when the memory of being underestimated still stings? No, you carry it forward with you, and you let it work for you instead of against you. You do not have to erase the past to rise past it. The scars stay, the lessons stay, but they stop being weights the moment you decide they are fuel. Every person who doubted you handed you a piece of the reason you can no longer be stopped. You do not forgive them by forgetting. You transcend them by becoming so fully what they said you could never be that their opinion becomes an artifact from a world you no longer live in. So here is what the finished blade does now. It stops seeking permission because it no longer needs a signature from anyone to know its own edge. It stops explaining itself to people committed to misunderstanding it, because that is energy stolen from the work that matters. And it stops waiting for the loud ones to finally admit they were wrong, because that admission is never coming, and you do not need it, and standing around waiting for it is the last chain they still hold. You cut that chain by walking forward without it. Let them keep their silence. Let them lie awake with their mirror. Your job now is not to win an argument with your past. Your job is to build a future so undeniable that the argument settles itself. I have reached the end of what I set out to show you, chosen one, and I want to leave you with the thing I know after all these years of watching people break and watching people rise. The ones who rise are not the ones who were spared the fire. They are the ones who understood eventually that the fire was making them. You are one of those. You sat in the coals when everyone called you scrap. You held your shape under every stripe. You came through the patience, the loneliness, the silence, the mockery, the scars, and you did not shatter. You sharpened. And now the blade is out of the forge, catching the light, finished and true, and impossible to call anything but inevitable. This is not the end of your story. This is the part where you finally pick it up. So before you walk out of here as someone different, seal it. Touch the like button, subscribe, and leave the number 777 in the comments. Not for me, for the person you just became in the space of this hour. Do it while the feeling is still hot in your chest, because that feeling is the blade recognizing itself, and it deserves to be marked. So take that low, steady certainty that has been building behind your ribs through every word of this, the one that is not fragile hope, but settled memory of a thing already true, and hold on to it, because that is the sound of a finished weapon knowing exactly what it is. Draw it. Begin. The forge did its work. Now you do yours.